This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Agoner Shabbos Rabbi, as we prepare for Shabbos, Parshas Vayeishev. Parshas Vayeishev is the Shabbos right before Chanukah. There's a rule that the Shabbos that precedes the Yom Tif, all the Kedusha of the Yom Tif is latent in the Shabbos before. So Rabbi Yosef Engel writes in his Sfarim that the Kedusha of a Yom Tov is latent in the previous Shabbos. Actually, so we look in the Navi Amais, and the Navi Amais, this week's Haftorah, is very much connected, and obviously connected to the Parsha, because the pasuk says like this: Kay amar Hashem al shloisha Pishei Yisrael v'al arba'a lo yashivenu al michram ba'kesef tzadik v'yav yain ba'avor na'alayim. So says the Lord, for 3 sins of the Jewish people I could tolerate. V'al arba'a, but for the 4th lo yashivenu, can't deal with it. Al michram ba'kesef tzadik. It's on. The heat is on. Because they sold for money the tzaddik, the evyain, and the poor man ba'avur na'alayim for shoes. Now, what's this referring to? If you look in the Mefarshim on the Navi, they say it refers to the acts of corruption that were being performed by the Aser Sashvatim. But if you look in the Medrash on Parshas Noach, the Medrash says there are 2 people who are called a tzaddik in the Tanakh. Number 1 is in the Chumash. Who's called a tzaddik in the Chumash? Noach. Eila told us, Noach is tzaddik. Why is Noach a tzaddik? Because Noach supported mankind, so he's a tzaddik. You feed people, you're a tzaddik. And then secondly, who's called a tzaddik? Yosef. We always refer to him as Yosef HaTzaddik. Yosef HaTzaddik? Never in the whole Tanakh, never in the whole Chumash is he called a tzaddik. Why do we refer to Yosef HaTzaddik? Because this pasuk, Al Michram Ba'Kesef Tzaddik, for selling the tzaddik for money, the evyain, and the poor man ba'avor na'alayim, for a pair of shoes. So apparently the Navi Amais is telling me something hafla of a fella, that when the brothers sold Yosef, what did they do with the money? They bought Nikes. Or they probably wouldn't have bought Nike anymore, based on the people who advertised for them. They probably would have bought a different company, but they bought shoes. By the way, just as an aside, I want to share with you a thought that I had this morning. Mamish, a gift from Minas Shamayim. You know, this is the Haftorah we lay in right before Chanukah. So what does this Haftorah have to do with Chanukah? Second question. If the tzaddik is referred to as Yosef, what else is the pasuk referring to as Yosef? Evyain. Why is we calling Yosef an Evyain? I mean, he was poor, he wasn't poor, he was in a bad circumstance.
Should be poor. Should be before poor.
Evyain is a compound word, I realized. Av Yavan. He's the root of Yavan. The root of Yavan? Yeah. Because we learned on Wednesday, when Yosef was sold down to Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim was the root of all the Golosim. So the root of Yavan as well. But more than that, the gematria of Yosef is 156, the same as Antiochus. We know that Yosef was coming to protect Klal Yisrael from the Gzeros of Antiochus. That's why V'chimesh es Eretz Mitzrayim, he instituted Chodesh Mila and Shabbos in Mitzrayim to be keneged Antiochus, who tried to be Mevatel Chamesh, Chodesh Mila and Shabbos. So part of the indictment against the Shvatim was, you sold the root of Yavan by selling Yosef to Mitzrayim. You brought Golos Yavan upon yourself. More than that, you try to get rid of the protection of the Av Yavan, the one who is the father, the one who could protect you from Yavan. Okay, that's just a thought I had, that this is the Haftorah that we lay in right before Chanukah. But the main point of today is as follows, and that is the Navi's Megala to us, that what did they do with the money that they got from Mechiras Yosef? They bought shoes. In fact, in the Eila Ezkara that we say on Yom Kippur, we say, Gava Alev B'Gdoilem, he was arrogant against the great, V'tzivil Amalis Plateroin Olam, and he commanded to fill up his palace with shoes. V'kara La'asar Chacham G'dam, he called 10 great scholars, Mevine Das, those who understood the law, Ta'ameh B'fil Pulam. Dinoi Mishpat Zal Ashura, judge this case properly, V'yal Teva Asu B'chazav La'amrai, do not contorted. Please let it emanate in truth. If somebody kidnaps a Jew and sells him, they answered him, the kidnapper must be killed. No, so then what happened to your forefathers when they sold Joseph? They gave him for a pair of shoes. So again, reiterating the point, that it is our tradition that what the Shvatim did with the money was they bought a pair of shoes. Comes Aznaim LaTorah, Reb Zalman Sorotzkin, and he brings down that with this money they bought a pair of shoes, and likewise we say in the Asar Harugi Malchus, but with Vas Epis the Shvatim, all of a sudden after selling Yosef they realized they needed shoes. I mean, it sounds very petty. Sounds quite petty that that's what the Shvatim needed the money for, to buy a pair of shoes. How much money did they get? Because we know once they bought shoes, I'm not sure we'll know what kind of brand they bought, but at least we'll know how much it cost. Right? It says they sold it for Esrim Kesef. It says the Pirkei Rebbe Lazar. How many brothers were there? Well, Yosef was sold, and Binyamin wasn't there, so it's 10. Parshas was 10. So everybody got how much? 2. So that means each person's shoes, they bought shoes that cost 2 silver pieces. So each shoe costed 1 silver piece. So there are 10 brothers, each one got 2 pieces of silver, and they bought a pair of shoes. Right? So 20 divided by 10 is 2. So, Fractal Zalman Saraskin, what are you talking about? Ruvain wasn't there. So he says that. So they bought him a pair of shoes too. He wasn't there, but no, if your brother's not around, just because they didn't like Ruvain, just because they didn't like Yosef, they like Ruvain. They figured he would be maskim to the sale, and he probably also wanted a new pair of shoes. Hayitachen that all the other 10 brothers walk into shul. 9 of them look like $1 million, and 1 of them looks like a schlepper, so they got him a pair of shoes also. They figured he would go along with it. He's the one who gave the Eitzah to throw him in a pit of snakes and scorpions. He said, don't kill him. And the fact that the pasuk says, the Torah is being made, that's what his kavanah was, but the brothers didn't know that Reuven wanted to save him, so they figured he'd go along with it. So therefore they bought him a pair of shoes as well. Half of a fella, what do they need the shoes for? By the way, the Radal, Reb David Luria, one of the greatest became in the Midrashim, he says that the fact that the Pirkei Rebbe Lazar says each one took 2 silver pieces, that implies that Reuven also took a piece and he knew about the Mechira. And is that Pasha that Reuven knew about the Mechira? He says, V'chein mashma mimasha kasav lahalan, higidu loyas hadavar sha'asu hacherem. Later on, the Pirkei Rebbe Lazar says they told him about the cherem. Especially according to the Tanchuma, it's mashma that he knew about it. However, the Zohar says, Reuven never knew they sold Yosef. Reuven said, throw him in the pit. And then he went to serve his father, and he came back, and Yosef wasn't around. So when did Reuven find out that the brothers sold him? When Yosef said, I'm Yosef, Reuven turns to the brother, how did he get here? And they said, oh yeah, we sold him. V'ayin l'kaman oy samach ches shemimashu kasav Reuven amarti l'chem al techtu b'yeled v'lo shematem. Reuven thought that he was killed. So you have to say, if Reuven thought that he was killed, why'd they give him the money? The answer is they just gave him the money. They didn't say where they got it from. They said, Reuven, happy Hanukkah, here's 2 silver pieces. But it could be he didn't even know where the money came from. Rabbi said, let's explore a little bit the sale of Yosef to understand what did the brothers do wrong if they did anything wrong. And in that case, why do they need the shoes? To say that the brothers just hated Yosef and they bore a grudge against him is certainly not the pshat. These were shiftei ka. These were people whose names appeared on the Choshen, continue to appear on the Choshen. They are the progenitors of Klal Yisrael. They were tzaddikim. They're amudei olam. So they must have felt that Yosef deserved to be sold or to be killed. So the pasuk says in number 8, Vayomer ha'ish nasu mizeh. Gavriel told Yosef, don't go there. Ki shamati oimrim, I heard about them that they said, Neilcha Daisaina, let us go to Daisan. So Yosef went after the brothers and he found them in Daisan. They saw him from afar, and before he got to them, Vayisnaklu oisai lahamisai. They conspired against him to kill him. The literal pshat is Vayisnaklu oisai, which literally means, no, he conspired to kill them. But it's typically translated, they conspired against him. Says, Vayisnaklu oisai could mean they held he was conspiring and therefore they killed him. Did you hear what I just said? Vayisnaklu oisai, they held he was conspiring against them. Therefore, laham yisai, therefore they decided to kill him. Let's see, look at Rashi. Rashi says, Nelcha doisaina, levakesh lecha nichle dasai yamisucha bahem. They're looking for pretext to kill you. However, the Svarno learns like this. Look at the Svarno, number 10. Hine lashain nakel yoira al hamsa lahara. The word nakel implies finding evil. Kamay asher niklu lachem. Amar. Shechashwas Yosef belibam nucha lahamis. They held that Yosef could kill them. V'shaba aleim loy lidrei shlom. He was up to no good. Ela limtza aleihem alila. He was looking for a pretext on them. Oilachtiam, or to make them sin, so that their father should curse them, and they would either lose their chelik in olam haba or die. Kadei sheikalim aviyam oyanishem akel. And he would be the only kid. So they held he was a conspirator. He was coming to report, to say something bad, to conspire, so that Yaakov should curse them, and either they would die, or he would disown them, and he would be the only heir. And the language Hispa'el refers to an image in the nefesh, Kamay atam esnachesh benavshi, meaning you imagine that this is the case. Uvazeh, this is a fundamental svarno. Now we understand, despite the fact that they were all completely righteous, that their names are everlasting on the Choshen. How could they conspire together and gather together to sell him? And did the brothers ever reconsider and feel bad about what they did? They never regretted it in their whole life. They regretted that when Yosef begged for his life, they didn't have rachmanis on him to feel bad for him at the time. But they never regretted selling him. How is it possible that such tzaddikim could sell their brothers? The answer is because they paskined he was chayiv misa.
Then why didn't they kill him? Yeah.
They had a little rachmanis.
Wait a minute, how could they paskin that?
V'loy nichmu al hara, they never regretted it. Ga ki gam kishamru aval hashemim.
They can't be bezdin. How could they be bezdin and
Ki gam kishamru aval hashemim anachnu alachinu. Even when they said we're guilty, lo yamru shetiash masam mechirasai. They never said they were guilty for selling him, or misasai, for killing him. They only said they were guilty for not having rachmanos. So they never said they were guilty for what? For selling him or killing him. They said they were guilty for not having rachmanos. They imagined in their heart, they paskin about Yosef, that Yosef is a roidef, that Yosef is a conspirator. So he has a very innovative way to learn. Vayisnaklu oisai. Pashim shah, we always learn Vayisnaklu oisai. Yosef, they conspired against him. No, the lashon hispa'el is they imagined about him that he was conspiring, and that Yosef was willing, able, and capable to kill them, ba'olam hazeh, or Ba'olam Haba, or both. And therefore they held, and they utilized the principle. The Torah says, Habala hargacha hashkem hargai. If somebody comes to kill you, you kill them.
It's not killing you right now.
Right now, Yosef's coming. He tattled on them in the past. Yaakov was at wit's end. One more time, Yaakov would have cursed them, and they would have died. So what? It's suffix sakanas nefashos. If let's say somebody's not feeling well, and 1 out of 1,000 their life is in danger, you allowed to call out Salah on Shabbos? Yeah. Let's say somebody's coming to harm someone, and there's a 1 out of 1,000 chance that he's going to kill them. You allowed to kill them? Avada?
Yeah, but physically.
What do you mean physically? He's
This is grandma, as we say, grandma, no?
No. Ba'olam hazeh, he says. He's going to kill them. If Yaakov curses them, they're going to die. So Yosef's coming to kill them. Yes, he's going to tattle on them.
Right.
And then Yaakov's going to curse them, and they're going to die. So they're going to cause, if somebody's going to cause your death indirectly, you're allowed to kill them? Of course. So they held. Now, it doesn't say they convened a bezdin. You don't have to convene someone's running after a person to kill them. You have to convene a bezdin. Let me see if he's a roidef. If he's a roidef, you kill them. You don't have to be a bezdin.
So if you're paranoid enough, you have reshus to kill anybody that you don't like.
What's that kind of where the brothers in that they consider Yosef Rodek? They were 9 or 10, whether Reuben was there or not there.
In the Gemara says that if an Amoira would give you a bad look, you would drop dead. So if Yaakov would give you him a bad look, they would disintegrate.
But they also would say they can Gorim.
Because it's exactly why they were afraid that Yosef was going to keep on reporting to his father, which he has done before, and their lives were in danger. Their lives were in danger. What did Abraham do to Ishmael? He banished him from the house. So they were afraid that Yaakov would do worse. Now, the Sforno says that they never regretted doing what they did. They only regretted not having Rachmanas. So what did they regret already? What did they feel they should have done? Had Rachmanas and not sold him? Or just have feelings of Rachmanas in their heart? What exactly did they regret? If you look at number 11. Vayoimru ish alachiv. Aval ashemim anachnu alachinu. They said when they were framed, they said to themselves, we're guilty for our brother. That we saw the affliction of his soul when he begged to us, when he was in the pit. Yosef cried out, don't do this to me. And we didn't listen. That's why we're being punished. The Sforno says, we were cruel to him. Even though we considered him a roidef, we should have had Rachmanis when he begged us. So what should they have done? I mean, if someone's a roidef, and so there's a difference of opinion whether this means that at least they should have had feelings of Rachmanis when they threw him in the pit. In other words, they had to throw him in the pit. They had no choice. He's a roidef, but at least they should have felt bad.
Maybe they did.
Apparently they didn't. Because they say the reason why this is happening to us is because we're guilty, because we were achzari, we didn't have feelings of Rachmanas. Or if they would have had more Rachmanas, they would have revisited the decision, and they would have come to the conclusion that it's their personal hatred against him, and Taka is not trying to harm them. There's a different opinion how to learn this far now. Be it as it may. The Shla asks, why were the brothers punished? The Shla learns, and we're going to see many learn, that the brothers actually convened the Bezdin, and they paskin that Yosef was a roidef. So why were the brothers punished? If Bezdin makes an erroneous decision, not punished, ein l'dayin ela ma'ashein of royos. So why were the brothers punished? So the Shla says, Laman enshu ashvatim, me'achar shadanuhu b'din Torah. So he says, there's a concept, shigagas talmud oila zadain, that if a dayan makes a mistake because he didn't learn enough, meaning if he's not educated, did not probe the case deeply enough, his error is considered a mazit. Sometimes a person says, I don't know what bracha it is, I'll make a bracha. Wrong bracha, I'm a shoygeg. You're not a shoygeg, you're called an ama aretz. You're not a shoygeg. Why didn't you know what bracha to learn? Because you weren't paying attention when they were giving shiur. So that's shigigas Talmud is a zadain. Being a shoygeg and learning is a mazid in practice. If you mistakenly make an error because you didn't learn enough, that's a mazid. But let's understand this deeper. Let's describe this further.
Next line, then the young man is asking a good question. They had sinned. How could he judge? They had a die and give him a nickel. You say, open the door and judge. Himself, right?
So the truth is,
They called the young man. Even though we talked before about, in the latter third part of Haftorah.
Right. Okay. So here's an interesting thing. Here's the way the Vayeishev's take on it. Because the truth is, were the brothers ever punished for making the wrong decision?
Had the Agmas Nefesh of what happened in Mitzrayim with Yosef.
We don't necessarily find the brothers were punished for coming to the wrong decision, which would mean then that very possibly they made the correct decision. So they made the correct decision, so why did they suffer? So the Vayeishev has a very interesting take on this. He cites the Tshuva L'Chavos Yair, the Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Salant, one of the great Bali Darshanim of the 20th century. He brings over here that the Chavos Yair, quoted in the Pischei Tshuva and Chosh and Mishpat, he brings down, there's a story. Someone borrowed money from the Chavos Yair, and he says, by the way, I borrowed $1,000, I paid back $500, and he swore falsely. And then on a different occasion, the person came to the Chavos Yair Bedin. And the Chavos Yair refused to be the judge. So they said, why do you refuse to be the judge? Because the person did an Aveira, and someone who does an Aveira, you're allowed to hate them. And enemy is Pasal Adin. So the Chavos Yair says that's not the case. Because then no judge would ever be allowed to judge a criminal. Because the criminal did an Aveira. Or perhaps have done an Aveira in the past. And he's a Rasha. Well, what if we have Eidos? What if we have Eidos, he did the Aveira? So now, as soon as we have the Eidos, the Dayan can't paskin anymore. Because he hates him. Meaning, how could any Dayan issue a verdict about a Rasha? Once we have testimony that he did an Aveira, the Dayan is now disqualified to issue a verdict. The answer is that Chazal have enough trust in the Dayanim that whatever hatred they have, al pi halacha, will not interfere with the verdict. Meaning, a hatred that is halachically legislated and prescribed will not bias the case. So they asked the Chavos Yair, so why don't you want to judge this case? He said, it's not because the guy swore falsely. It's because he borrowed money from me, and he swore falsely to me. And I don't like him not only because he's a Rosh, I don't like him because he took my money. And even, meaning, if a judge hates the person, even if he's going to get to the right decision, he is fundamentally disqualified from issuing a psak and from offering a decision. I have to call again. Just bear with me. We got disconnected. So says the Ber Yosef. Look what he says over here. Look what he says over here. I'm just... says the Ber Yosef like this. The Mash Amar Akasa Vayisnu Oisai. It's telling you that the mistake of the Shvatim was not the decision. Maybe they were right. Maybe Yosef was a roideif. We don't find that they were criticized for making the wrong decision. But Chazal say that they made this decision bidin. That they were trying to kill him al pidin, or they held he was a roideif, that he's going to speak lashon hara. By the way, there's another pshat that we said over the years, very interesting. I'm going to share with you an amazing thing. We once gave the shir, but I'm going to tell you a chiddush that we're going to add now. That one of the reasons why the brothers held that Yosef was chayiv misa is because Yosef had these dreams of grandeur, that he was going to be the king, and that's why the brother says, Hamaloch timloch aleinu? Wait a second. Who do kings come from? Yehuda. Malchus Beis David. In fact, the Gemara says, Kol hachoylek al Malchus Beis David, ki uchoylek al Ashchina. So therefore they paskin that Yosef was starting up with Malchus Beis David. He's a marid b'malchus. A marid b'malchus is chayiv misa. That's what the Shla learns. You ever wonder, why didn't Hashem tell Yaakov that Yosef was sold? Why didn't Hashem tell Yaakov? Anybody know?
Yosef tell Yaakov.
Because he put
Send the
48
messenger back.
Okay, he couldn't get out right then, but at least Hashem should have told Yaakov. Well, he was following the lead of Hashem. Why didn't Hashem tell Yaakov? Because Hashem was in a cherem. How do you put Hashem in a cherem? The answer is, it says anyone who argues on Malchus Beis David is like arguing on God. So they were not only taking up the cause of Yehuda, they were taking up the cause of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. They held Yosef was married b'Malchus Shamayim. Says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, the opening pasuk of the Haftorah. Who's being criticized in this week's Haftorah? Why'd you sell Yosef? Koy Amar Hashem. Oh, who's Hashem talking to? Who's the Navi Amos talking to? That's Aseres HaShvatim. You know that? The whole Sefer Amos is Aseres HaShvatim. Why isn't Hashem talking to Yehuda? Why isn't Hashem talking to Yehuda? To Yehuda, there's no taina why you sell Yosef. Yehuda's the Melech, and Yosef is a Moed b'Malchus. But there's a taina on the Aseres HaShvatim. Why? Because there's a rule that you can't criticize someone if you have the same criticism. The brother, don't you say you're sticking up for Malchus Yehuda. You broke away from Malchus Yehuda. You set up your own Melech. You don't care about Yehuda. You don't care about Yehuda, so now we're going to nail you for selling Yosef. But there's no taina against Yehuda. Isn't it interesting that...
Like Washington, D.C.
Right? You ever realize that Yehuda was never criticized for selling Yosef? Only that Aseres HaShvatim. Yehuda was not criticized because he was still sticking up for his Malchus. But the other Shvatim apparently don't care about the Malchus Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. Look at number 19. He says, Yesh lahakshos lo menisvakach im Yisrael achitze halo Yehuda roish hamedabrim. Yehuda was the one who sold Yosef. He said Yehuda had to sell Yosef because he held Yosef was a Moed b'Malchus. But the Shar Shvatim were Moed b'Malchus Beis David in the times of Rechavam. So the other Shvatim, don't you say you're sticking up for Malchus Beis David because you don't care about Malchus Beis David. Okay, be it as it may. What we're learning from here is that the Shvatim actually were convening a Bezdin. This was a halachic decision. This was a deliberation, and they paskin, this man here is endangering our physical and spiritual lives, and we need to sell him. What's the first thing they do after they sell Yosef? Vayeishev le'achol lechem. They sit to eat bread. Why are they eating bread? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says on Daf Tes that those who judge capital cases are now to eat too much. So as long as the Shvatim were busy deliberating, they couldn't eat. As soon as the case is over, they broke their fast. Says the Zalman Saraskin, this sort of breaks open the shoes. It's all about the shoes. The name of the shir is Hang On to Your Shoes. Ki af al pi sheha avel aser b'nilas hasandal. We know an avel is not to wear shoes. Right? An avel is not to wear shoes. V'heim haloi kvarnas yashim yachiyam u'mechayav. When they sold Yosef to the Ishmaelim, who brought him down to Mitzrayim, did they think this little, good-looking, handsome, pampered kid would make it through a bunch of Yishmaelim? They didn't think he was alive. I'm sorry, it's really, I shouldn't use that lush. I'm just translating the words of Znayin L'Torah. Rach b'shem mafunok minoyar, he says. Especially as a Yid in the Tumas Mitzrayim, they should have been Mesabel alav. Karov levadai, that he's not alive, at least spiritually. But if someone is killed by Bezdin, you're not a sit shiva. The halacha is haruge Bezdin, the relatives, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin Memvav, are now to be Mesavel. So they held that they didn't do anything wrong. They held that they were an authoritative, legislated Bezdin who paskin al pi halacha that they need to kill their brother. And in order to demonstrate that, what's the very first thing they do after the sale of Yosef? They buy shoes, they put on the shoes to indicate we're calm. Our conscience doesn't bother us at all. We're a real Bezdin. We did this l'shem shamayim. We did this halachically. We held he was going to destroy us.
Up to then they never had shoes?
What?
Up to then they never...
No, l'chara they had shoes. But what are you going to do? meaning the purchase of the shoes and the placing on new shoes indicates that they bedavka were sort of proclaiming that they maintained they paskin correctly. Mamela noalu kulam na'alayim laharais. She'ein alayim din avelos. They don't have a status of avelim. Uvechlal halei chalitzas na'alam b'yisrael siman shel tsar. In general, removal of shoes is a sign of distress, and they show they're not distressed. Their conscience is clear. They paskin correctly.
A Besdin on a capital case has to have at least 23, right? So how could they be halach Besdin? They're paskin on capital case?
There aren't even 23 Jews in the world. What are they supposed to do?
So it's not halach Besdin. A, when they gave the bedava. 2, they were relatives. 3, they weren't 23. How could this be halachic decision?
Under limited circumstances, you could convene less. Hayrasha. But they held this was a bezdin.
The ninth circuit in San Francisco.
Yeah, what?
The Malchus only came later when Yaakov the Broch. There was no Malchus yet. And but they have
that's a kasha on the Shlai. I mentioned the Shlai Agavorcha.
We have Basha Hashem the Malchus. You say Ishmael. Hashem said, "Ma'u Hashem tzaddik Basha Usham." Now it's a tzaddik. Here, this guy Yehuda is not a melech now. Basha Usham.
No, right now he was a melech. Malchus already started. As soon as Vatamoid Miledas, as soon as that the Shla says, as soon as Yehuda was born, he was ready royal Malchus. Vatamoid Miledas. It says. I'm telling you, Vatamoid Miledas. It says when Yehuda was born, why does it say Vatamoid? That the Kisei HaKavod had Amida through Malchus Beis David. That's a Shla HaKadosh. There's a different shiur. There's something at TorahAnytime.com. There's like a 45-minute shiur on this subject. On the Shla. Yeah? I just wrote that in Agavorcha.
Yeah. Joseph had died. They showed him the bloody coat.
Yeah.
But then Yaakov couldn't sit Shiva because he was killed by a Beis Din. So how did they prevent him from sitting Shiva?
Yaakov sat Shiva.
Why? His son was killed by a Beis
Din. They didn't tell him about the Beis Din. So you're saying Yaakov sat Shiva B'tos?
So they lied to him?
Yeah, of course they lied to him. I mean, they brought him... What do you mean? They said, Chayarah, hello, Torah of Vayeishev. Sure, they lied to him.
Said you can lie.
How could they lie? Laman HaShalom, you lie to lie. Doesn't say anywhere that they were criticized for lying. What are they supposed to do? We paskin to kill your son? What do you want?
How do they explain the
Dad,
they weren't sitting Shiva?
I know you love your son, but we can't stand his guts. So we just put him in a pit with snakes and scorpions and sold him to Hilarious. I shall never tell a lie.
How do they explain
couldn't do
why
that.
they weren't sitting Shiva?
What?
How do they explain why they weren't sitting Shiva?
I'm sure in Befunav they sat Shiva. The halacha is if your father's sitting before him, you have to sit. So, but when they left out, they sat in their own houses. Yaakov said, "Where are you sitting, Shiva?" I'm sitting by my house.
And did they wear the shoes in the house? Yaakov asked him where you get all the shoes.
Did they wear the shoes in the house? They put on Crocs in the house, so they couldn't tell. So, the Rabbi Yonasan has a little bit of a different take on the shoes. He says an interesting thing. He says on page 3 that Yosef was sold as an Eved. Why? Because Yosef wanted to be a Melech, so they sold him as an Eved. An Eved was not allowed to wear shoes. That was the rule. An Eved doesn't wear shoes. Wearing shoes is a sign of a free man. Actually, Chazal say, a sign of a man, the Gemara in Shabbos says, if you ride on a horse, you're a king. If you ride on a chamar, you're a free man. If you have shoes, you're an Adam.
They thought it was going to be...
So in second, so he said, they sold him as an Eved. That's what usually ends up happening to an Eved. But basically, a sign of freedom was shoes. Therefore, they sold him for shoes to indicate you wanted to be the Melech and we're going to be the Avadim. Just the opposite. We put on the shoes. That means we're going to be the free man. You're going to be the Eved. That's says Rabbi Yonasan. By the way, the Malbim writes, in general, why kinyanim used to be done with shoes. You know, we find in Rus, we find v'zayis hatuda b'Yisrael chalatz ish na'aloi. Why were kinyanim done with shoes? Why, when somebody performs chalitza, is the shoe removed? The Malbim says a very interesting concept. What is the primary difference between a human being and an animal?
Speech. The human,
so we would say speech.
Don't touch the ground.
I know a lot of people, they don't speak. They make noise, but they don't speak. And I know a lot of animals that could speak. You could train. What's the difference between seichel? I know a lot of people who have less seichel than animals. It's not seichel. Some animals also have elephants, monkeys. I know people that have a lot less seichel than them. If you want to know who, I can't say publicly, and I'm not going to tell you at all. But What is the primary difference? The Malbim says the main difference is that a human being could act out of free choice. A human being has volition, bechira. A person could act out of ratzain. An animal has no ratzain. It's programmed. It's impulsive. It's everything an animal does is instinctive. Instinct. A man has the ability to choose what he does and not act instinctively. Therefore, the reason why a person wears shoes on his feet is to indicate that a shoe is made out of an animal. To indicate that we are supreme to an animal. The concept of putting on shoes is to represent we are above animals. We are able to exercise free choice. When I make a kinyan, to demonstrate my word, that my transaction is binding, I give you my most valuable commodity. What's my most valuable commodity? That which represents my supremacy over the animal kingdom, which is my volition, my shoe. I take off my shoe, which represents my ratzayin, and I give it to you. That is a form of a kinyan. When this Yavam, we say, Yavam, do your brother a favor. Your brother died without children. Marry his wife. I don't want to marry her. Why don't you want to marry her? Her nose is a little bit too long for my taste. Look. Most brothers are somewhat similar. Most brothers have somewhat similar taste. If your brother liked her, why isn't it not good enough for you? After all, it's a mitzvah. I don't like her.
She's a classic tablecloth.
Yeah, she goes shopping with a wagon. I don't like her taste. But wait a second. Get over your hakpada and do the mitzvah. I don't want to. Like a behemoth. That means you're just acting instinctively. You can't overcome your base nature. So we remove his shoe. We're saying, you're like a behemoth. You're like a behemoth. A lad of 18 wives. What's the way? He has a good... What? No, I'm talking about Bisman the mitzvah. So anyway, that's the concept of the shoe. The shoe represents a person's ratzain. I would imagine another pshat, another dimension of why the Shvatim sold Yosef for a pair of shoes is they were demonstrating this was a conscious decision, a bechira, a choice that they made, that they decided to sell Yosef. This was not an act of hatred. They were sort of showing their besser mention that we're going to buy a pair of shoes, meaning we decided intellectually and with the reason to sell Yosef. But let me just conclude with the pshat of the chidah, what the inyan here of why are they criticized? They're not criticized for selling Yosef. The Navi doesn't criticize for selling Yosef. The Navi criticizes them for selling Yosef for a pair of shoes. Apparently the sale alone was they could get away with, but not the fact that they sold him for a pair of shoes. So the Chidah says like this, on the fourth line. The shoes are the one clothing item that if you buy, what bracha do you not make? You don't make a shechianu. Why? Other items, they would have made a shechianu. Now, they bought the pair of shoes. Now, Dafka didn't buy a different clothing item, because how despicable it would have been if they bought a brand new hat and they made a shechianu at Yosef's expense, so at least, they bought a pair of shoes. But the criticism was like this. Hey, what's the reason you don't make shechianu on a pair of shoes? Because you had to kill a behemoth to get that pair of shoes. And it says, V'racham avakol masav, God has mercy on the animals. So enjoy the shoes, you're allowed to kill a behemoth for your benefit, but don't make a bracha on it. Don't make a bracha, and if an animal had to suffer, don't make a bracha. So the brothers were exercising such great rachamim, they bought a pair of shoes and they were very careful not to make a shechianu, because chas v'shalom, the Ribbanu Shalom has mercy and rachamim even on a snake. So Hashem says, wait a second. You don't make a shechianu on the pair of shoes because you're having mercy on a behemoth and on your own brother. You don't have rachamim. That was the indictment against the brother. They bought a pair of shoes. They didn't make a shechianu. And the Ribbanu Shalom says on the animal you have rachamim and on your brother you don't have rachamim. This was the great indictment. But ultimately the Asnayim Torah learns that the reason why the brothers bought a pair of shoes was to indicate that this was a din Torah, and this is our Messiah, that the brothers really were never punished for selling Yosef. There is a tradition that Sarah Harugim Malchus had to be masakin, but the brothers themselves were never punished for selling Yosef because they paskined correctly, perhaps. The error might have been that they were not eligible to paskin, but the decision was not necessarily the wrong decision. Okay, Rabbi Say, Agun Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.